Hello everyone, I am Sana and welcome to today's lecture which is about physiological and psychological stress. Today's lecture is expected to cover the following objectives. Number 1, the concept of physiological stress. Number 2, the physiological model of stress. Number 3, the physiological symptoms of stress. Number 4, the physiological effects of stress. Number 5, meaning and types of psychological stress. Number 6, psychological stress symptoms. Number 7, the physiology of stress. Number 8, effects of long-term stress. Number 9, individual differences in stress reactivity. Number 10, physiological recovery and allostatic load. And what makes events stressful. Let us start with an example which will give you an idea about how physiology and psychology interact with each other. You are late for an important meeting because you are in a long line of traffic. You first feel frustrated, followed by anger. Your muscles tense up and your heart rate increases. Even though there is little you can do to change the situation, your body is getting ready for fight or flight by following the lead of your unhappy brain. This is the ideal illustration of how physiology and psychology interact. Although there are many differences between physical and psychological stress, they are nonetheless closely related. Physical changes in your nervous system are the result of physiological stress, which is what causes psychological stress, the feelings you experience when you are stuck in traffic. This is how stress negatively affects your body, your lifetime, as well as your mindset and physical health. Now, coming to the physiological stress. The disturbance of a person's internal environment causes the activation of regulatory mechanisms designed to restore homeostasis, which is referred to as physiological stress, such as malnutrition, noise, exposure to the cold, or bleeding. The body's reactivity to stresses is called physiological stress. Your body reacts in this way at the cellular level when it perceives a threat that necessitates the fight or flight response. Such molecular adjustments are what make you sweat before a speech or make your pulse beat quickly before jumping. Disease, addiction, and even excessive drinking can all result in physiological stress. The body releases its own cells to clean up when it must deal with an immense accumulation of poisons or pathogens that may physiologically stress the body. Here, we will just discuss the association between physiology and psychology and exclude any discussion of the stress brought on by physical variables. Let us move to the physiological model of stress. Stress is frequently viewed as something that drains our mental energy. When we are under stress, the scenario or circumstances that are causing us to feel stress consume our thoughts. These stressors could induce anxiety or even depression in us. Because it addresses how our cognitive system responds to stress, this is classified as psychological stress model. We all experience and handle stress differently though. We are mindful of how psychologically respond to stress. But what about the physiological model of stress? The physiological model of stress examines how our physical bodies respond to, deal with, and change under stress. Let us now discuss the physiological symptoms of stress. The effects of stress can be felt throughout the entire body, impacting almost every system. When you are stressed, you could have shortness of breath or a rapid heartbeat. This is your cardiovascular system responding to stress. Additionally, stress has an impact on the digestive system by bringing on symptoms like heartburn or indigestion. Stress can deregulate our neurological system, interfere with our sleep cycle, make us feel exhausted, and make us gain or lose weight. Even the menstrual cycle and a woman's capacity to become pregnant have been found to be impacted by chronic stress. Now, we will talk about the physiological effects of stress. A different illustration of body's reaction of stress is a change in pH levels. When the body homeostasis alters as a result of being exposed to stressors, that is when stress occurs physiologically. Numerous bodily regions that are engaged in response to stress have been identified by researchers as being in cause of the physiological changes that take place. Animals are believed to have an inherent stress response, including humans. The physiological impacts of stress can harm the body permanently if it is subjected to for an extended period of time. The general adaptation syndrome defines the states of stress that we experience and how these affect the physiology of our bodies. When stressed, the body undergoes various changes. Hans Selye introduced the gas model to explain what happens to the body when we are exposed to stressors and how the body adjusts to stressful circumstances. According to the approach, we go through 3 stages when we come into contact with the stressor. The body goes into fight or flight mode after being exposed to a stressor, which causes the first stage, the alarm, when symptoms including as accelerated heartbeat and rapid breathing occur. Resistance is the second stage, during which the parasympathetic branch is engaged in an effort to calm the body and combat the symptoms that the alarm phase had brought on. The adrenaline and cortisol chemicals are secreted by the body to do this. The body expends a significant amount of energy during this phase. Exhaustion is the final stage during which the body has expended all of its energy and is unable to combat the effects of stress. Prolonged exposure to this stage impairs immunity and the cardiovascular system. Now, let us come to another objective of our topic, which is the meaning and the types of psychological stress. According to Kolak Walker, psychological stress is defined as a response to unpleasant stimuli in a person's surrounding environment, such as novelty stress or social defeat. Now, coming to types of psychological stress. There are various kinds of stress, and they can all have an impact on one's mental and physical well-being. Stress-inducing situations and events, often known as stressors, might happen just once, only momentarily or repeatedly. Acute stress, episodic acute stress, and chronic stress are 3 different categories of stress defined by APA. Now, coming to acute stress. This is triggered by a momentary stressor and it passes fast. Almost everyone goes through this at home at some point in their lives, and it can be brought on by a number of different circumstances. Acute stress examples include attending a test, interview for a job, thrilling quick events like mountain skiing, briefly unexpected incidents such as breaking heart to prevent a collision, having an argument. Episodic acute stress. When someone suffers acute stress on recurring basis or frequently, it is referred to as episodic acute stress. There are various causes why this might occur. Assuming an excessive amount of responsibility, being in a position that is exceptionally demanding, being in charge of loved ones who experience persistent or severe challenges, unfavorable circumstances, having interpersonal issues, inclination to interpret things catastrophically. Lastly, chronic stress. This type of stress lasts for weeks or even months at a time. It's possible for someone to grow accustomed to it and stop seeing it as a stress or as a problem. Chronic stress includes, for instance, money problems, dissatisfaction in a relationship or marriage, challenges in employment or in school, having a prolonged disease, issues in your home or personal life. Now, let us discuss psychological stress symptoms. The body releases stress hormones like adrenaline and norepinephrine in response to stress situations. This is designed to assist you flee from an immediate threat by raising your blood pressure, blood sugar, and heart rate. As a result, stress has an impact on many biological symptoms and varies according to the individual. The cause and the person determine the severity. Now, effects of stress on cognition or thinking include difficulty focusing, memory issues, negative thoughts, lack of self-confidence, worrying, trouble making decisions. As far as emotional signs are concerned, it includes irritability, changes in mood, hopelessness, feeling tense or anxious or nervous, unhappiness, inability to relax. Additional signs of physical stress include headaches, muscle tension, digestive problems such as nausea, vomiting or diarrhea, decreased interest in sex, increased heart rate, high blood pressure, and fatigue. In addition to these, changes in behavior are also possible. These signs consist of alterations in eating or sleeping habits, preventing social interactions, nervous behavior such as teeth grinding, nail biting, and fidgeting, increased consumption of alcohol, cigarettes, caffeine, or other substance, a decline in academic or professional productivity. Let's discuss now one more objective of today's lecture, which is the physiology of stress. Stress causes physiological changes in the body that could have both immediate and long-term negative effects on health. It also engages psychological suffering. The response heavily involves two interconnected systems. These are the hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical axis and the sympathetic adrenomedullary system. Let us now briefly talk about sympathetic activation. The cerebral cortex in the brain recognizes when something is unsafe or threatening, which in turn triggers a series of reactions mediated by these evaluations. The hypothalamus, which started one of the earliest reactions to stress, namely sympathetic nervous system arousal, receives information from the cortex. The adrenal gland's medulla is stimulated by sympathetic arousal, which causes the gland to release the catecholamines like norepinephrine and norepinephrine. These reactions cause the unpleasant sensations we typically feel in response to stress, including changes such as increased perspiration and constriction or peripheral blood vessels. The immune system is also modulated by catecholamines. In reaction to stress, parasympathetic functioning may also become dysregulated. Stress, for instance, may have an impact on heart and cardiovascular health. Changes in the heart rate variability may both represent a road to disturbed sleep and help to explain the relationship between stress and sickness and an increased risk for mortality because parasympathetic modulation is a crucial restorative part of sleep. One more important concept in this is HPA activation. Stress also causes hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis to become corticotropin-releasing hormone, which was released by the hypothalamus, stimulated the pituitary to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, which in turn stimulated the adrenal cortex to release glucocorticoids. In the event of an injury, it helps reduce inflammation by conserving carbohydrate reserves. As a result of stress, it also aids in the body's recovery. Stimulation of the HPA axis in response to persistent or recurrent stress can eventually make it less effective. Cortisol patterns on a regular basis could change. Healthy cortisol levels start out high in the morning and gradually decline throughout the day, peaking after lunch, flattening out at low levels in the late afternoon. However, individuals who experience chronic stress may exhibit any of a number of abnormal patterns, including elevated cortisol levels that last well into the evening or afternoon, a general flattening of the daily rhythm, an exaggerated cortisol response to a stressor, or in some cases, no response at all. Any of these patterns could point to the HPA axis's weakened capacity to react to and recover from stress. Let me bring your attention now towards the eighth objective of today's lecture, which is effects of long-term stress. Since physiological mobilization equipped humans to fight or flee in archaic times, stressful situations now only sometimes necessitate such modification. That is, stress brought on by work pressure, travel, family conflicts, and financial problems do not require the same dramatic mobilization of physical resources as stress brought on by today's stresses, and this process in some ways does not achieve the goal for which it was originally designed. In the long run, too much epinephrine and norepinephrine release can cause immune system suppression, adverse changes like raised blood pressure, heart rate, variations in normal heart rhythms like ventricular arrhythmias, which can be a sign of unexpected death, and neurochemical imbalances that may aid in the emergence of psychiatric disorders. The development of atherosclerosis is aided by cholesterol levels and free fatty acids, which the catecholamines may also affect. The immune system's functionality may be harmed by the immunosuppressive effects of corticosteroids. According to Stockman, Giordani, Brennan, Schock, and Steingart, prolonged cortisol secretion has also been linked to the degeneration of hippocampus neurons, which can cause the issues with verbal function, memory, and concentration. This process may also be one of the mechanisms that contribute to salinity. Depression frequently causes pronounced HPA stimulation, and depressed individuals have longer and more frequent cortisol secretion bouts than non-depressed individuals. A further effect of persistent HPA stimulation is the storage of fat in central visceral locations, that is, belly fat, as opposed to the hips. Some studies utilize the high waist-to-hip ratio that results from this buildup as a sign of persistent stress. Now, the question is, which of these reactions to stress can lead to disease? It's possible that HPA-axis activation has more severe health effects than sympathetic activation. It's possible that HPA activation is also necessary for disease to progress through sympathetic arousal in response to stress. This justification may help to explain why exercise is health-promoting rather than harmful, even if it causes sympathetic arousal but not HPA activation. Contrary to exercise, stressors can be felt for a long time after a stressful event has ended, and cardiovascular activation may continue even if the person is unaware of it for hours, days, weeks, or even years after the initial stressful event. Such wear and tear on the cardiovascular system may foster illness. Stress may also compromise immune functioning. Among these changes is the impairment of the immune system's ability to terminate inflammation, which is an early response to stress. Chronic inflammation, even low-level chronic inflammation, is implicated in many diseases including coronary artery disease, and so the impaired ability to terminate inflammation may be an important pathway by which stress affects illness outcomes. Poor sleep can be a consequence of chronic stress. Because sleep represents a vital restorative activity, this mechanism too represents a pathway to disease. Coming to one more important objective, which is individual differences in stress reactivity. Different people react differently to stress. Reactivity is the level of modification brought on by stress in autonomic, neuroendocrine, or immunological responses. Some people are more biologically susceptible to stress than others due to their genetic makeup, prenatal experiences, or early life events, and as a result, they may be especially vulnerable to negative health effects as a result of stress. For instance, S. Cohen and colleagues discovered that people who had high level of unpleasant life events and who also responded to laboratory stresses with significant cortisol responses were especially vulnerable to upper respiratory infections when exposed to a virus. Only when they were experiencing high levels of stress were individuals who had inadequate immune responses to laboratory stressors particularly susceptible to upper respiratory infections. High immune reactors, however, did not exhibit the differences in upfront respiratory illness as a consequence of the stress they underwent, possibly because their immune systems were quick to react to the threat that a prospective infection posed to them. These and the other studies imply that the association between stress and sickness is significantly influenced by psychological and biological reactions to stress. As will be clear, it is thought that variations in reactivity have a role in the emergence of hypertension and coronary artery disease. Now, coming to the physiological recovery. The physiology of the stress response places a strong emphasis on recovery after stress. A sign of the cumulative harm that stress has done may be the inability to bounce back quickly from a stressful experience. The persistent cortisol responses that take place during times of extreme stress have received particular interest from researchers. In a fascinating study by Perna and McDowell, the cortisol response of professional athletes were assessed after intense training based on whether they were under high or low levels of stress in their lives. The cortisol reaction was prolonged in the athletes who were under more stress. As a result of its effect on cortisol recovery, stress may increase the window of vulnerability to illness and injury among competitive athletes. Now, we shall discuss allostatic load. As we have seen, the body's many physiological systems change in response to stress. The term allostatic load has been created to describe the physiological effects of prolonged exposure to the physiological changes brought on by persistent or long-term stress. Childhood is when the allostatic load might start to build up and affect lifelong disease risks. Increased weight and elevated blood pressure are two signs of the accumulation of allostatic stress. Accumulating allostatic load might be thought of as accelerated aging brought on by stress because many of these changes happen naturally as people age. This kind of damage can result in disease and a higher chance of mortality over time. Chronic stress can worsen harm already caused by high fat diets, little exercise, alcoholism, and smoking, which are all behaviors that stress can promote. Now, shifting your attention towards the last objective of today's lecture, which is what makes events stressful. The first one is the dimensions of stressful events. Even while events aren't always unpleasant, certain aspects of them increase the likelihood that people may perceive them as stressful. The second is negative events. Stress levels are higher when negative rather than unpleasant things happen. Positive life events that consume time and energy include holiday, shopping, adjusting to an unexpected job promotion, and marriage. Somehow still, these pleasant experiences are less demanding than unpleasant or unfavorable occurrences like receiving a traffic ticket, looking for a job, dealing with a death in the family, getting divorced, or dealing with constant disagreement. Particularly toxic is the rejection that is expressly directed at you by someone or something. Compared to pleasant occurrences, negative ones cause higher psychological distress and bodily problems. Next cause is uncontrollable events. Events that are unmanageable or unanticipated are more stressful than events that can be controlled or predicted, especially if they also come as a surprise. Even if they can't change it, people feel less stressed when they believe they can prevent, alter, or end an unpleasant event, or they have access to someone who can. Not only do feelings of control lessen the perception of stress, but they also affect the body's biochemical responses to it, such as catecholamine levels and immunological responses. The other one is ambiguous events. Situations that are unclear cause more tension than events that are obvious. When a possible stressor is unclear, a person is unable to take action and must instead focus their energy on trying to understand the stressor, which can be a demanding effect that drains their resources. In contrast, obvious stressors allow the person to move on to solving the problem and do not keep them locked at the problem definition stage. The potential for confrontation is typically linked to reduced stress and improved coping. Next is overload. People who are overloaded feel more stress than those who have fewer chores to complete. For instance, job overload is one of the major causes of stress at work, the impression that one must accomplish too much in little time. Finally, which stressors cause stress? In contrast to peripheral life domains, core life domains make people more susceptible to stress because fundamental life areas substantially involve important components of the self. One study of working women for whom parental identity was very important discovered that pressures connected with the parental role, such as feeling as though their children did not receive the care they required, took a toll. In conclusion, experiences that are unfavorable, unmanageable, unclear, or overwhelming, or that involve important life goals are perceived as more stressful than occurrences that are advantageous, under our control, distinct from one another, or that entail minor life course. This brings us to the end of the topic. Thanks for watching.